Okay, so namaste and good evening to everyone present here today. I am Medha Singh, your moderator for today's session, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you all to this inaugural session of SHoDH Sahitya Samvad series. But before we proceed with this event, continuing with our tradition at SHoDH, we begin this event on a spiritual and auspicious note. For this, I invite Adarshji to kindly play Saraswati Vanna to invoke the blessings of the goddess of wisdom and learning.
या कुन्देन्दुतुषारहार धवला या शुभ्रवस्त्रामृता या वीणावरदण्डमण्डितकरा या श्वेतपद्मासना या ब्रह्माच्युत शङ्कर प्रभृतिभिः देवैः सदा वन्दिता सा मां पातु सरस्वती भगवती निःशेषजाड्यापहा
Okay, thank you, Adarsh ji. The Sahitya Samvad series by SHoDH is a book review cum discussion platform which aims to foster meaningful conversations around ideas, knowledge, and narratives that resonate deeply with our society. Today, we begin this journey with a book that challenges conventional economic thinking and offers a fresh perspective rooted in indigenous wisdom. Dharmonomics and indigenous wisdom and indigenous and sustainable economic model by Mr. Sriram Balasubramanian ji. We welcome you, sir. But before we dive right into the session, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge some distinguished presence with us today. We have amongst us Dr. Alok Singh ji, who is National In Charge SHoDH and is also an assistant professor at Ramjas College. We have with us Mr. Arjun Anand ji, who is National Convener SHoDH and is also a doctoral candidate at Jawaharlal Nehru University. And last but not the least, it is my privilege to introduce the author of the book, which is at the center of today's discussion, the distinguished Sriram Balasubramanian ji, who is a reputed economist, columnist, and author. He has worked with organizations such as the International Monetary Fund. He writes extensively on global economic trends, new growth models, dharmic culture, and India's socio-economic trends. His two recently published books, The Dharmonomics and The Kautilyanomics, have been hugely and widely appreciated by economists, historians, and policymakers and the likes. On behalf of the entire SHoDH family, I once again welcome you, sir, and we are very glad to have you here and for your precious time that you have shared with us. But before I hand over the mic to for his deliberations and discussions, I would invite Arjun Anandji to give us a brief introduction about SHoDH, its mission, vision, and the idea behind Sahitya Samvad series. Over to you, Arjunji.
Ji, namaste to all. So, SHoDH, which is the Students for the Holistic Development of Humanity, is a registered organization which was founded in 2018. SHoDH is an effort to start a dialogue within the research community of India to bring researchers, academicians, legislators, bureaucrats, and even media personalities across all disciplines over one platform, and which will facilitate seamless exchange of ideas through a collective team effort, like the effort which we see in this event. uh, we aim to create an environment for transdisciplinary research by brainstorming and innovating at the societal grassroots level. We envisage creating a holistic and multidisciplinary climate of research in India, and building an indigenous research culture, most importantly, through streamlining the vast and extensive Indian knowledge system. And this series which we have inaugurated, जिसका श्री गणेश आज हो रहा है, this series is a brainchild of that thinking, that vision only. And we look forward to this discussion. We welcome you, sir. Namaste. Over to Medha ji.
Thank you so much, Arjun ji, for this insightful overview and for laying today's groundwork. But before I hand over the mic to Sriram ji, to set the stage for today's discussion, we have a short and brief book review by Utkarsh ji, who is a master's student at JNU. So I'll request Utkarsh ji to kindly share his PPT and to take forward today's review discussion.
Thank you, Medaji. Just give me a sec. I hope my screen is visible to everyone. Can I get a confirmation?
Uh, it is, but it's blank. Yeah, now we can see it.
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, I would like to thank SHoDH for giving me this chance to not just review this book, but to also gain so much knowledge in such a short period of time as I read through the book. Dharmonomics, an indigenous and sustainable economic model, as the book's title goes. First of all, what is the aim of the book? As book itself lays out, that through Angus Madison's data set on economic history that highlights India as one of the most prosperous countries during ancient times. So what was the reason for this unprecedented economic growth? The book introduces and elaborates on the concept of Dharmonomics as foundation for studying the economic model and thought processes in ancient. The book argues for the importance of Dharmonomics in shaping the functioning of kingdoms during this period. But first of all, we have to look at what Dharmonomics is. It takes into the presence of a continuous and alive Dharma-based economic system for 5,000 years ago. A system that goes beyond state versus market dynamics and which is growth-centric, sustainable, and global, which it has three major pillars: Cotilian Dharmic Capitalism, KDC, something which was already elaborated in the first book. In this, it integrates components of Dharma, such as ethics, harmony, and responsibility, and envisages a state rule based on non-intrusiveness, on wealth creation through a global outlook, which is sustainable and also has welfare in focus. The outcome for such a state is a clean administration, clean institution, something, if we really look, is a very necessary for our Indian state, with proper enforcements of rule. Its second pillar is Shreni Dharma. Shreni are to some degree one of the central institutions of Dharmic capitalist system, which could be grossly simplified as semi-independent organization following dharma. Their own self-dharma is Sreni Dharma. This has been aptly explored, especially through the economic systems present in common era of southern kingdoms in the books. And thirdly, the Dharmic economic system with temple as the center of this ecosystem. Now, the scope of the book is quite vast. It nearly covers 5,000 years, but we can look at some of the specific areas to see the rigorous work that Sir has done in this area. First is the treatment of SS civilization, which is Saraswati Sindhu civilization, or as some say, Indus Valley civilization. It looks at some of the presence of Srenis and guilds, which was sustainable. It also perhaps most realizing or most enlightening concept for me as I was reading the text was even a presence of something like roots of international gold standard, which can be traced in SS civilization. The book cites examples such as six-angle graphene coins for this. It also looks deeply in Chola dynasty's economic system, and perhaps one of the first examples of expedition done for ease of doing business, which was done by Rajendra Chola, driven by geopolitical conflicts between Kambuja Desh, that is Cambodia, and other kings of Southeast Asia. These books also examine the sophisticated economic practices of other areas. But perhaps uh, the most important work that this book has done has been challenging the Western narrative of economic history. Now, this book addresses the neglect of indigenous research on India's economic system. It critiques the dominance of quasi Western narratives in economic history, which often disregard India's rich indigenous thought process. The book highlights how no serious effort has been made to analyze the extensive historical material from either an economic or historical narrative standpoint. It seeks to fill this gap, showing the originality and the relevance of Dharmonomics. Now, as I read through the book, because the book is quite vast and it looks at so many different areas that it's very difficult to talk about it in such a short period of time. So I would like to just focus on certain things which I'm really thankful for as I read through the books. One of the first thing that the book gives us is an economic understanding of continuity from Saraswati Sindhu age to later Indian kingdoms to even today, and it does through rigorous analysis of economic model. This connection that we see, the compelling case for the centrality of dharma and the prosperity of Indian civilization that this book makes is quite enlightening. The primary argument of a system that is growth centric and sustainable, and which has been quite alive for 5,000 years, is amazing to look at. This uh, book also shows us a way forward. Now, as India's economic standpoint and economic value increases on a global stage, it gives us a philosophical response of India's journey into 21st century as it positions itself as an economic power. It lays the foundation for a new era of serious research into India's historical economic system, whose stability is unmatched, whose stability has been present for 5,000 years. Sir, first of all, I would really like to thank you for this book, because for me, and I'm pretty sure that everyone who reads through this book has not just been a way to gain factual knowledge, but also a new perspective on India's economic system, and not just the reason for India's development. We always talk about the uh, great history and the glorious history that India has, but to see the reason for it, not just in philosophical sense and not just on the binary of a material West and a spiritual India, but in a sense where India's presence or dharm's uh, all-encompassing need that we have today. So thank you for this book, sir, and at last thank you, Shodh, for giving me this chance to look through this work and work through this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Utkarsh. It was quite a lucid and brief presentation of a book that can really not be summarized in like 5, 7 minutes. And wow, what a fascinating work. But who else to hear than the man himself who has written the book? So, without any further ado, I would request and invite Sriram ji to kindly discuss and deliberate on the ideas, broader perspectives, and the themes that the book entails. Yes, over to you, sir.
Namaste. Thanks a lot for inviting me. Can you hear me well?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Okay. Okay. Thanks for inviting me for this discussion. Uh, Thanks to Arjun and his team who have been kind enough to get together, all of you. And thanks for the wonderful review. It's not easy to try to summarize some of these ideas. It was done quite well. So I'd like to make this as sort of engaging as possible. So I will try to make my comments brief, and then we can have a Q&A session so that I engage with the audience. So first of all, I think it's important to understand that that economic history is a vast area which is highly underrepresented in Bharat. The historians who worked on history often miss a lot of the Indic elements of history. And the economists have no clue of history. So you're left with, very few people trying to make an attempt to understand economic history. So I think one of my key research areas is to try to understand what is the indigenous Bharatiya economic model. Often we talk about often Swadeshi as sort of a proxy for a Bharatiya model. But Swadeshi is a political philosophy. It's not an economic, sort of idea which the past was based on. Of course, there are certain elements of it in the past. I would characterize, that the last 1,000 plus years was a much more sort of sophisticated, continuous economic thinking. So through my research, I started off with the Arthashastra, which is, as you're aware, a 3rd century BCE text, and derived this idea of dharmic capitalism. In very simple terms, I define dharma through the prism of ethics, responsibilities, and harmony. Ethics through the prism of institutions, leadership, the need for having clean institutions, clean leadership, clean governance systems, and also having clean business practices. And then I also move on to the area of harmony, which is engaging with the rest of the world. Much of ancient Bharat, for thousands of years, we have traded, we have exchanged ideas, we have, crossed oceans, we have dominated the seas for thousands of years. And much of this was because of this principle of engaging with the rest of the world, both in terms of ideas and in terms of exchange of trade and commerce and things like that. So that is another important component of harmony. And the third bucket is, and of course, communal social harmony, as well as being harmonious with the rest of the world. The third definition of dharma in this book series is on responsibilities, where I talk about familial responsibilities, societal responsibilities, environmental responsibilities, and things like that. So all these three sort of definitions map onto three major outcomes, which is a state which is strong, rule enforcing, but doesn't micromanage, wealth creation, as I mentioned, through a global outlook, and lastly, sustainable growth and welfare. The idea of sustainability and its importance, and the role of welfare as well, supporting the real poor and the lower sections of society. So this is what I define as Kautilyan Dharmic capitalism, based on my first book on Dharmonomics. And in that book, I look at various chapters which talk about current economic policies like trade, inequality, labor contracts, sustainable growth, and how some of Kautilya's ideas are relevant even today. And I provide some perspective on all this. In this new book in this new book, Dharmonomics, I focus on, it's an extension, it's a sequel to the previous book. I talk about common era kingdoms, the Cholas, Pallavas, Pandyas, Kambuja in Cambodia, Southeast Asian kingdoms, Vietnam, Champa, and argue that a lot of these kingdoms, especially in the early common era period, were all derivatives of these dharma-based economic frameworks. So to this effect, I speak about the three pillars which your colleague beautifully summarized in the review, which is one is the Kautilyan dharmic capitalism, which I briefly explained. Another is the temple-based economies, which is what I call the dharmic ecosystem, and the centrality of it, especially in Southeast Asia, in the early CE period. And the third part is Srini Dharmas, which is basically the corporate guilds who played a very important role in financing the Cholas and financing a lot of the trade and a lot of the socio-economic activities and also political activities. And their presence as sort of a multinational corporation of yesteryears, a combination of multinational corporation as well as say regulatory bodies and things like that. So the Srinis played a very important role, and they were underpinned by the idea of dharma. So I showcase in this book through a variety of these chapters of how each of these kingdoms had various iterations of this model. And this went all the way till about 17th century CE, till the Vijayanagara Empire. So in a sense, we are talking about almost 2,500 years of continuous economic prosperity and underpinned by the idea of dharma. And I showcase that in these two books. And the third part of the series is again discussing on how some of these ideas can be applied for contemporary Bharat as we move towards Viksit Bharat. I think that's very important, for us to get some perspective. And I think this provides a broad summary of the book, which I think will entice a lot of you to read the book. But I think I would also attach this, since you're having a lot of these. Your audience today is all a bunch of young people, scholars. I think it's important to understand why some of these research needs to be done. Why now? We're talking about thousands of years later. What is the need for this? So we were speaking about Angus Madison's data set just before. While Madison's data itself is, could be scrutinized because, it's data thousands of years back, I think the trend lines that Madison provides is very important. It's quite clear that there was economic prosperity in Bharat, during the Common Era period, till about 17th century CE, and much earlier as well. And that is backed up by a lot of secondary evidence, what I call triangulation of evidence, which is secondary evidence and anecdotal evidence. Secondary evidence in terms of manuscripts, in terms of inscriptions, in terms of all this type of evidence, which indicates across in all these common era kingdoms that Bharat was a place of extensive prosperity. And most of the world was seeking engagement with Bharat on the account of extensive prosperity. For example, the Roman current account deficit was the early CE era was highly dependent on the exports and imports that it was doing with Bharat. The second highest discovery of Roman coins after Europe was found in southern Bharat in early CE. Similarly, you find that a lot of travelers and traders from across the world wanted to come to Bharat and also trade with Bharat, and also have given a lot of accounts of it. This is what I call anecdotal evidence, where you have third-party people, traders such as, say, the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, Greek traders, Israeli traders, who would travel in Bharat and write accounts of what they saw, and provide a third-party perspective to some of the institutions that we talk about and to some of the economic activities that we talk about. So in that sense, I think it's important to triangulate this evidence between these three pillars. One is the data that we see. Two is the secondary evidence. and three is the um, uh, anecdotal evidence. And it's important to do this because, see, any civilization who wants to progress, wants to aspire to be a superpower, if you take history, whether it's the United States, which derived a lot of its economic philosophy based on the Protestant ethic, the modern day capitalism that you see, the Chinese model of economic prosperity, even the Japanese model of economic prosperity, were all derived in some form from some of their civilizational values, some of their history. And that served as an inspiration for them to deal with the complex problems and attempt the complex problems of both their countries as well as the rest of the world. So I think it's very important for us to appreciate and acknowledge and understand what our past is. I'm not saying everything from the past is glorious. Of course, there are a lot of issues with the past as well. But we need to understand that there had to be some level of uh, uh, they had members who were not Bharatiya citizens, like for example the Jews who were trading in Bharat. These institutions were run democratically. They had democratic process to choose their leaders, um, and they had all the governance structures that we talk about in corporate norms today. Most of them. So they were very important institutions, and that's why you notice that most of these institutions in this economic prosperity was there independent of the state. You had people across board, irrespective of who was in power, to sort of economic prosperity was sort of a parallel thing that was happening, irrespective of various kingdoms changing, various conflicts happening, because that was underpinned by an entity which is aligned to the way of life. So what I'm trying to say is that there was a lot of the elements that we talk about today, and the principles behind this had a lot of, I would say, recall value or concurrence from the past as well. Similarly, the temple-based economies, that's another theory which I bring here, looking at the temple as not just a mere socio-religious institution, but as an economic institution as well. For Similarly, the role of trade itself in the Cholas were different to how it was in the Pandyas. Um, and lastly, the role of Srinis again becomes very important. One of the major reasons why Rajendra Chola, the son of Rajaraja Chola, who built the Brihadishwara temple, went all the way to Southeast Asia to conquer, but did not rule Southeast Asia, was because the Srini, the Ainuruvar, which is a major guild called 500 in Tamil, were trading from Bharat all the way till China using the Straits of Malacca, which is part of Indonesia today. I mean, between Indonesia and Malaysia is where Straits of Malacca is. And they were stifling this guild from functioning. So that triggered the Cholas to go and have a battle with them and win the battle and ensure that access was given for this guild to function properly. And the Ainurwar had various offices in all these places in Cambodia, in Vietnam, in Thailand, and even in Indonesia and things like that. So that led them to win the battle, but they didn't conquer or rule the place because as long as the guilds were given access, they were fine with it, and then they came back. What I'm trying to say is that common people, traders and community folks uh, were ahead of the political masters, and they were engaging with the rest of the world, and that led the rulers to follow suit. And this notion that somehow we became open liberalized only after 1990 is perhaps the biggest hoax in terms of the various um, um, misrepresentations that have been done in the past. Because we have been, except for the post-independent period from 1947 till about 1990, we have been engaging with the rest of the world continuously through our civilization. Not just ideas, not just thought process. We even had leaders. For example, there was a Pallava king, Nandivarman II, who in early 7th century CE was anointed as a king, but he was born in Champa in Vietnam. So we had a ruler who was born in some other place who had Pallava lineage, who was brought and made king. And he became one of the most spectacular rulers of the Pallava Empire. So this notion that somehow we are a closed civilization, and somehow we are we didn't know anything about all these things is very far from the truth. So what I'm trying to say is that in conclusion, what I'm trying to say is that we were a civilization which was which had underpinnings of the Dharma-based economic frameworks. They played a very important role in facilitating a lot of this prosperity. It is a very refined civilization. Besides all the ideas that we talk about, in terms of science and in terms of other factors, they also had an economic worldview. And what I attempt to do is to showcase this 2,500 year, plus a continuity of Dharma-based economic frameworks, and argue that its relevance also remains today because of the fact that this dharmic way of life is what we define majorly, even in our day-to-day interactions. So it's important to study this, and it's important to debate and engage with this, and more importantly, be cognizant of this. Because unless we are cognizant of this, we won't have the confidence to deal with the problems that are today and for the future as well. So with this, I will sort of wrap up my presentation. I'll be glad to answer questions. And of course, if before I do that, I want to also urge all your listeners to go read the book and review the book, because unless you guys go to all the platforms in Amazon and others, please make a conscious attempt to review the book, because the more you review, more you discuss, more you engage, more you spread the word, the more such ideas emanate with people. And this is very important. Not because I'm talking about my book, but I'm saying this because this type of content needs to be disseminate to people. And look, we this is serious, rigorous scholarship. We're not talking about some op-eds, for like 4 or 5 op-eds written in 5-10 weeks. This is almost 8-9 years of work in both these books. So this is a very rigorous attempt to take on some of these issues in a very serious and coherent manner. And I think that message needs to go across. So that's my request to all of you. Request you to read Dharmonomics and also review it as beautifully as your colleague just did some time back. Yeah, with this I'll wrap my presentation. Of course, I'll answer any questions that are.
Thank you so much, Sriramji, for sharing your thoughts. And it was an highly invigorating and intellectually stimulating discussion. Having you was really an honor for all of us. Truly, this book presents a compelling exploration of economics through the lens of dharma and sustainability, making it both timely and timeless. Your insights have truly enriched our understanding of the Indian economic worldview. And when I say that I am really keenly interested in reading this book forward, I speak for everyone here who has joined us. So, yeah, thank you again, sir, for your time and for sharing your thoughts and discussions behind you writing this work. And show this a platform which engages with research scholars. So, if for nothing else, I am very sure that the research scholars and the aspiring young talents here would really look forward to your work and would refer to your work for the meticulous research that you have pursued in writing this book. So yeah, thank you once again. And with this, I would like to open the floor for today's question and answer session. I request the participants to kindly send their questions, comments, or any reflection in the chat box, and I'll read it from there. Also, the feedback form will be shared shortly. So do fill the feedback form, and the feedback form is important for you in order to get the e-certificates. So with this, I can see a few questions in the chat box, and the first question is from Puneet Thanti ji, and he writes, "You discuss the importance of continuum in research that bridges dharma and economics. What strategies or institutional frameworks would you suggest to ensure that new researchers and students can sustain this continuity in their work, especially as you work towards a qualitative time series with your final book on dharma based economic idea for Vikasit Bharat?" So, would you like to answer, or should I just read few more questions?
I can probably answer this and then we can
Okay.
combine. Yeah, see, the first point is that look, we are trying to establish a qualitative, or rather, I'm trying to establish a qualitative time series, and through that establishment, I've realized that these are dharma-based economic frameworks. So what I'm trying to say is, it is not a preconceived notion that one has before, and then draws this qualitative time series. It's doing a lot of this research and seeing that there is coherence and continuity on based on the idea of dharma, which is leading to a lot of this work. So that's an important distinction, where the research leads to the outcome, not the other way around. So yeah, in my next book, I deal with a lot of these contemporary policy issues, how some of these things can be applicable. But I think it's important to understand two things. One, no one is advocating for a wholesale sort of change to the status quo that we have today, right? Because we have institutions, we have modern institutions, most of which have been well thought out and well delivered. But there can be a lot of changes in independent policy, in terms of particular policies where a lot of these ideas can be incorporated for greater efficiency of policy outcomes. So, for example, the Swachh Bharat effort is a very good example, where uh, it's essentially a dharmic quality of saucham, which is basically cleanliness, which all of us have, and that was transferred to the neighborhood through a massive scheme of the prime minister and the machinery of the state, and it became very successful in rural areas because people started asking or started thinking, is their dharmic responsibility to do this? And now, if you go to most of the rural areas, it's become almost like an autopilot, where people want to, especially except for the main Darbar street, most of the other streets are generally fairly clean, and people see their consciousness, their dharmic consciousness to be clean, right? So this is an example of a public policy initiative whose efficiency has increased multifold purely because you approached it through acknowledging the way of life that people have and expanding that way of life into better policy outcomes. So this sort of provides the platform to understand that policymakers need to appreciate this way of life and align policy to that, not the other way around, where a bunch of you guys or a bunch of people sitting in Delhi, in Latin's Delhi, just, coming with either anglicized notions of Bharat or limited understanding of Bharat, dictating what needs to be done for the rest of Bharat. If that's the case, then the rest of the Bharat will eventually win because the way of life has been there for thousands of years, and no one is going to change it for just some policymaker sitting in Delhi. And that's what is happening, I think, mostly in our country, where there's a parallel way of life which is happening, which runs economic activities, and the policymakers have been trying to figure out how to have seen policies not having resonance, especially when they are outdated. So what I'm trying to say is one important theme is to have policy aligned to the way of life, and then use specific instances where policy outcomes can be enhanced. So I think these are some examples of how we would approach this. I mean, more details will come in my next book. But I think in terms of scholarship, I think one needs to look at triangulation of research, which I mentioned. work on some of these ideas, and then see how it applies. And here, see, the 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 dharmic way of life is still continuous. So the sample size of what was there thousands of years ago is an extension of what you have today, with various variations, of course. So in that sense, it's a very thriving research area for us to explore. So yeah, I hope I answered that question.
Yes, all right, sir. Thank you. So we have another question from Srishti Parmar, and she writes, she asks, ancient Indian Shrenis share similarities with modern corporations, yet their ethical and social frameworks differ. What lessons from the Shrenis can modern corporations incorporate?
Yeah, so I refer you to my book in page 17 and 18. So this is the book, by the way, but page 17 and 18, where there's a table that talks about how similar the Shrenis are to the modern day corporation. What are some of the entities? So, for example, if you take about election and removal of management through a democratic process, which we have today, that was there in the Shrenis. Uh, Liability insulation, yes. Ease of formation, ease of exit business, ease of formation, ease of exit, that was there in the Shrenis. Um, a sharing of assets and liabilities, independence of board and committees, subcommittees within Shrenis. That was there, in the Shrenis, which we talk about today. Shareholder responsibilities, right? Who are the shareholders? What are some of their roles? What are some of their intent? Transparency and disclosure of conflict of interest, even that was there in the Shrenis. Opportunity for open debate of shareholders, like how you have these shareholder meetings. There were these shareholder discussions among people across various Shrenis, which enhance their ideas. So I think what I'm trying to say is the modern day corporation as we see it and some of the principles have found a lot of resonance in Shrenis. So I think in terms of lessons, one major lesson that we see is that these Shrenis were institutions which are there for through this entire period. Imagine having an institution which can outlast for such a long period of time. Just to give you some context, right? When I think most of you would be born after the economic liberalization of 1990. So during that period is when globalization really kick-started in the rest of the world, post the Soviet collapse. So globalization per se in the modern, lingo, it's a very loaded word, but in the modern interpretation, is not even 30 years old. But even in such a short period of time, you see a lot of pushback to a lot of the ideas which were there before. What I'm trying to say is, uh, when you're looking at thousands of years, there are various things which change. The idea of nation state wasn't there. It evolved. The idea of, currency, idea of principle, idea of, environmental changes, natural changes, whatever it is. So the key question really is, how did these institutions survive for such a long period of time? And what is the role of Dharma in all this? That's the key question I would ask, and its application to corporate world today. Because I think that is the key for sustainable organizations. And I think a lot of the principles from Srinis. So I think one should look at the principles of a lot of these ancient wisdom and try to see those principles that are applicable today. That sort of an approach is far more because the context keeps changing, but the principles are eternal, and that's how I would approach it. So this is what I would call lessons from Srinis for today.
Okay, so we move forward to our next question, which is from Adarsh Kumar Singh, and he asks, where does the Jajmani system stand as an economic framework in this whole context of Dharmonomics?
Can you repeat the question?
Okay, yes. So the question is, where does the Jajmani system stands in this economic framework in the context of Dharmonomics?
Yeah, I don't deal with that directly in the book, but that's an important question. I mean, these are sort of offshoot areas that keep coming up as you engage with people and scholars. That is another area which I would like to, explore a bit more. I have mentioned some parts of it, but again, that is an area which we need to try to look more. And of course, there are a lot of community-based guilds, right? I mean, that's another thing I speak about. For example, the Chettiars and the Vellalars in Tamil Nadu, the Jains, for example, the Maniyas. Each of them had their own sort of community-based commerce principles and how that function. That's a whole new area by itself, which I haven't really explored. But thanks for mentioning this. I would, try to do some research and get back to you on this, but this is a research in progress as well.
Okay, so with that note, I will take the last question for today's session, which is by Chandan Kumar, and he asks, "What inspired you to coin the term dharmic capitalism, and why capitalism? Is it because of the relative independence of Shrenis from state that seems to be the case for most of history?"
Yeah, that's a very important point. I brought in capitalism because it was initially, I mean, capitalism is a Western construct, but I want to relate it to uh, educated Indians who are often ignorant of these things, so that is made more appealable to that audience. It's an unfortunate thing, but that is one of the reasons why the capitalism word had to be added to it, because it's it's aligned to some of these ideas, but the capitalism nomenclature, I'm saying. So that's how Dharmonomics is different. I made a conscious attempt to sort of move away in this book. Uh, of course, and the Srinis were very independent from the state. That's a very important point. This notion that somehow the state controlled everything is again bogus. If you look at the Srinis, they are very independent. They drove the Cholas to go and conquer, not the other way around, right? So their financing, they were extremely powerful, but they stuck to their commercial role because they were underpinned by principles of dharma, and they were trading products extensively based on their own this thing. So the state might have provided some architecture, some regulatory architecture, but the Srinis were functioning because see, another thing is that they were they were like global institutions, right? So you cannot have so they were engaging in various types of empires. So they even if there's a state which is controlling them, it doesn't really apply because they were having offices in Cambodia, in Indonesia, and trading. So the independence of the Srinis as an economic institution is the most underrated, institution in my view, in terms of research, because it tells you so much about ancient Bharat. We talk about all the inclusive principles that we talk today are all embedded in the Srinis. So it's a very important point. Being independent of the state, yes, of course, I think that drives this notion of dharmic capitalism. And the idea of dharma again was, like I mentioned, right? It's a binary beyond the state and the market. It's a new principle, and it's a principle that is aligned to the way of life in this land. So I think one had to sort of combine these two things, and that's how the nomenclature also came. And lastly, before we wrap up, I think I missed one more thing. On LinkedIn as well. If you guys can talk about this, share your thoughts. Feel free to tag me because I find a very good platform where a lot of scholars and students engage on the subject, and it's important that you share and disseminate information. And of course, if you guys have any ideas, questions, feel free to reach out to me. And I generally work with some scholars for my books as they get bigger and bigger. If there are some good research areas, I'll be glad to collaborate with some of you. And yeah, thanks once again.
Okay, thank you, sir. With this, we reach the last leg of today's event. And to conclude it formally, I would request Kratika Sen, National Co-Convener SHoDH, to kindly offer her vote of thanks.
Namaste everyone. So I hope I'm audible. And also, sir, firstly, thank you so much, Sriram sir, for your deliberation. It actually, your book is not only about like we just generally we have seen people just going to the ancient thing and just getting back to it. But the most important thing is the most interesting thing that I found in your book is it's about the cooperation of corporate culture, capitalism, including all these modern notions as well in dharma. It's like Dharmonomics. It's not just about like we are just telling history. It's also about how it is relevant in modern culture as well. So thank you so much, Sriram sir. And I hope this is not the last discussion with you because this is Sahitya Samvad and we have just started. And this is the first series of Sahitya Samvad that we have started. Also, I would like to thank entire SHoDH team and entire SHoDH team for their immense support during this whole like for organizing this event. Okay, and especially Utkarshi because he read the book and then he presented a PPT also with it, so it was really helpful. And last but not the least, the audience for your valuable questions. As sir suggested that some of the points, some of the questions that you have raised are not like we are all discussing about it, and as a research scholar, it's also our responsibility to move ahead on this route. It's not just like we're having a discussion and it's the end of discussion. No, it is like a start. It's like a start of the journey that we need to complete. And I would like to conclude it by saying that it's not just the end. This is the start of the Sahitya Samvad that we have started. So the feedback form is available. ये अंत नहीं है, ये शुरुआत है. भले ही ये कार्यक्रम समाप्त हो सकता है, लेकिन ये शुरुआत है हमारे इवेंट्स की. तो आगे भी हम इस तरह के इवेंट्स करते रहेंगे. The feedback form is available in the chat, and the rest of the questions will like you can also contact sir directly from your end. As sir has already suggested, you can give suggestions on LinkedIn. You can contact him. And so I would like to thank you everyone once again.
Okay, thank you, Kratika ji, so much. And as she has mentioned, this is just the beginning of our very invigorating and thought-provoking book review discussion sessions. And we conclude with a promise to return back again with a good and intellectually stimulating read for you. So stay tuned with us. And as per our tradition at Shodh, we conclude the sessions with Kalyan Mantra. So I request everyone to join us for Kalyan Mantra, and I request Adarsh ji to kindly play it.
सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः सर्वे सन्तु निरामयाः सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु
मा कंचित
मा
दुःख
कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत्.
ओम
ॐ शान्ति
शांति
शान्ति
शांति
शान्तिः.
शांति. Okay, thank you all. Thank you so much for joining us. We will see you soon. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us, and we were really glad to have this conversation with you, and we really look forward to reading this book. And yes, so yes, thank you, thank you. That's all for today's session.
Thank you,
Namaste.
sir.
Namaste. Thanks for the opportunity.
Namaste, sir.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Thank you, sir.
Namaste, everyone.
Sure.